welcome to the Infinite Improvisation Podcast, adventures in music and creativity. This is Steve Treseler, joined by Lauren Best in our second pilot episode of our first season.
Woohoo!
Woohoo! So, our first episode was on the why. Why are we doing this? Why the conversation? Why improvisation? And now we're moving over to the what. What are we doing? What is improvisation? To kick this off, Lauren, you've been working on some various descriptions, short and long descriptions for our podcast. And in one of them, you threw out there, what is improvisation? Is it a practice, a philosophy, a game, a collaborative experiment, a ritual, a culture? And I might throw in, is it winging it, or is it noodling? Is it making up random things? Is it some magical gift? So we'll even start there and then get to the mechanics of what we'll be doing in this podcast. But I'll throw it back to you. Which one of those is it?
Well, what I just thought of now as you said that is like it's the coming together of like circumstances and skills in some ways, right? Or context and intention, right? In terms of it's like having by context and circumstances, right? I mean, like not only like a physical place, but also kind of the bounds we put on the improvisation, right? Or like the norms around it. I can explain more, right? Yeah. And then how we relate to that in terms of what we bring to it with, I don't know, skill might be the wrong term though, in terms of our ideas or our contributions. That's kind of how I would go really broad with it. What do you think?
Well, yeah, there's so many different angles and perspectives on this. This might be a little long-winded, but I've been
ready.
Prepping for this, thinking about this, but from a more narrow, so starting narrow and getting broader, I guess. So as a performing musician, that improvisation in my world, it's really instant composition, right? That we're composing something and performing it simultaneously, that there's the creation and the performance all happening in the same moment. And this is true in other domains, whether it's like improv theater or comedy, spoken word, freestyle rapping, visual arts, that we have this, creating and performing all at the same time. But as we zoom out, there's so much improvisation that happens in arts that's not maybe an improvised performance. It could be that moment of inspiration or the aha moment, just sort of making a connection between two unrelated ideas, or as I mentioned in the last episode, you might be experimenting and riffing or quote noodling around and something pops up and it becomes the seed or the inspiration for a larger composition or artistic work that in the end might be edited and or if it's a piece of music, it could be something that's performed the same way each time, but there was an improvised moment that got it started. And this can be the case for various other arts or crafts, architecture, or innovation of any kind in business or anywhere else. And then if we zoom out even further, just the improvisation in how we navigate life. One of my favorite quotes from Stephen Nachmanovitch, I just sent you his book. Excited to hear what you think of The Art of Is. But in an interview, he says, improvisation is what you do with the information that is coming into all of your senses at this moment in this room. And very much relating to music, he says that you're not just doing anything or being random or crazy or noodling around, that it's very specific about what, reacting to what you're taking in with your senses in this moment with these people. And that kind of attunement to your environment, which is necessary for other disciplines, other expertise, whether you're a physician or a therapist and you're in the room with someone taking in what you're taking in and how you're going to react in that moment, or a mechanic or someone who's writing legislation. This is really that attunement to your environment. And, this is how we navigate the world, whether we're having a conversation or taking a walk somewhere unfamiliar. You're kind of making these decisions based on the environment around you. and we can all relate that. We can relate that back to something very specific as well. And when we're creating art, but also be talking about some of the larger implications in culture and in life. So there's my kind of
and I find so interesting the intention behind it, right? So like, folks might say, I shouldn't say folks, people might say of all sorts, whether they are folks or other people. I'm just teasing. Might say,
Louis Armstrong said, all music is folk music. Haven't heard a horse sing a tune. Anyway. Yeah.
Is that like the performance aspect, or like the intention of it being art or being creation or whatever, like that is part of it. I think a lot of, if I were to ask people, by folks I meant, if I were to just ask someone on the street, like, what is improvisation? I think a lot of people would feel that the intention of performance or of sharing is part of that. But I think of like, if I'm outside and I hear a sound in nature, I hear like the sound of a bird and I whistle back, like, is that improvisation? Or am I just playing, right? What, I don't know, and then if I keep whistling with the bird, are we now improvising together? If I later on, because I'm thinking, oh, that whistling felt nice, and I'm imagining these sounds, and then I whistle some more, am I improvising then? Am I doing what a bird has taught me? Have I learned bird by rote? But I mean, that's just a scenario, just kind of some what ifs. Like I think about within the scope of improvisation and what is improvisation. I'm always a bit curious about like what the limits and boundaries are of that. And something I've been curious about is how we can create circumstances that encourage other people to improvise, as well as how we explore it in our own practices.
Yeah. But with the bird, that I would say absolutely improvisation. I'm working on rewriting my ebook, the Infinite Improvisation Handbook, and is actually starting out with listening as a prompt to listen to your environment and listen to all the ambient sounds in your environment, and then make some kind of response to it, and actually improvising a duet with the ambient sounds in your environment, which is kind of the new way that it's set up. That's the kind of one type of improvisation we can do at any point. And sometimes the tapping is annoying, I've heard, but it's when I'm drumming at the dinner table, and what are the limits? And there's artistically, it can be sort of an abstract or mysterious thing, but when it comes to conversation, we just do it all the time. Like musically, we might be used to playing something that's written down and we know what's going to happen. But if you're talking to someone who you can tell they're reading off of a script, like nobody likes that, or it's just a very scripted conversation, or who knows, you're on a date with someone and they're like trying to remember what the right question to ask is. It's just like we can detect it, and it's
Yeah. And there's certain norms within conversation, which is interesting, right? We think, like conversation, if we think of it as improvisation, it doesn't necessarily have a lot of structure or plan, we might think, but there's certain norms within conversation. I read an article about this a while ago, like one being like the amount you talk at once, right? Like if I'm very short in my responses and I'm kind of like violating that norm by not saying enough, by being extremely short or extremely quiet, like you would be like, what is wrong? Like it would feel very weird, and probably pretty quickly you would wonder if there was like, if I'm upset, if I'm really shy, like it would suddenly very much like take you out of that improvisation, so to speak, right? And likewise, if I talked too much, which might happen to me occasionally in life, that also violates that norm. There's other like conversational norms, but
one is too, like with it's good to ask questions, but if one person's just firing off a bunch of questions without responding to it, you feel like you're being interrogated, or it can be strange if someone's not riffing on your even if they're mostly asking the questions. People like when you ask them questions about themselves, but then if there's no response, that feels strange.
Yeah, and it's actually like way more structured and way more complicated than in some ways we give it credit for.
Yeah. And
what about
if you want to move on, it's like, oh, what you got going on later in the day? If I'm trying to terminate this conversation and get you to go away, then you kind of ask about something going on next, and then all right, see you later. There's different
different
ways.
or body language too, right? There's certain like ways that body language might suggest that the conversation's wrapping up, or that, I mean, it can suggest a lot of things.
Yeah, and that's what's strange about doing the video conferences too, because naturally body language, people aren't just like straight at each other, squared off at, off in a more neutral position where you're a little bit more of at a angle, so it can be, there's so much with that.
And it changes our interpretation of each other's eyes. I think, and we hear differently too, right? Depending on whether we have headphones on, and like the quality of audio, sometimes how we're hearing people can be quite different. What about, this is where all these circumstances we're talking about are sort of same room, same place, kind of like very, very relational or conversational. Even like when we're talking about responding to nature sounds, it still has that aspect to it. What about asynchronous improvisation? Like, how do you think that, like the stretchiness of that over time when it's people responding to one another, but not necessarily in the same room, or maybe not at the same time?
And that's a different flavor, but I've been doing, during the pandemic, some various collaborations with people, and some were improvised, with the delay, with software, with the sound painting group, doing this over Zoom and recording ourselves. And that's nearly synchronous, but not quite. That's its own thing. But I've been, I'm working on self-producing a record, which involves, collaborating with some different improvisers, but I might send someone a track or something, and then they'll improvise with it. So it still feels very natural and like a tight collaboration. They may take a few different passes at it, but there's this improvising happening and a connection, but it's not in the same room at the same time. So there's absolutely a place for doing it. Yeah, for doing this asynchronously. At least that's what comes to mind. A collaboration with one person records something, then someone else adds something else. I did this in a remote class I was teaching at the university, where I was designing this improvisation class. We did it with like a drum circle, and we did kind of a textural one too, where someone just added some layer of something, and then whenever someone else happened to have a layer to log, there was a small group, maybe 4 people. So someone started something, and someone else logged in and listened to it, used like a cloud-based digital audio workstation. Then someone else would add the next layer, and then someone else would add something. Then the first person came back and listened to it and was like, "Holy moly! I had no idea what was going to happen." So
with loops, like creating like a looped.
It wasn't even
thing?
a loop. It was just one. It's like a 2-minute track.
Okay,
and then someone else
cool.
added another one, and it was all for this one. I think it was all audio tracks. Someone may have added MIDI. It may have been a mix of virtual instruments and MIDI, but yeah, this one wasn't loops. It was just a more, and that was following in a saying assignment, but that's what it was. It was a class for credit, and the assignment of recording, of doing a duet with some ambient sounds in your environment. This one was pretty popular. So, and what was during the pandemic, so much of it was like their roommate typing. And some of it could be live. Other times people would record it, like go field recording, record a rushing river, and then later on, then drop that into their software and improvise on top of it. But other times it would be someone opened the window, and then you don't feel as alone. You're actually playing a duet with the sounds around you. So city sounds or nature sounds or birds or any of that. So we did that first. Then when it came time to overdub different layers, people had some ideas of some other sound layers that would be interesting for this project, besides playing notes and rhythms like they're used to. So
yeah, well, I guess part of it is like deciding upon some kind of structure, or we can call that context, right? And then leaving some things unknown, emergent. I was going to say up to chance, but really, sometimes, I mean, it can be chance, but sometimes it's quite often not chance. It's not luck or random. It's like actually a very specific response, but not planned. And kind of opening that up, which sometimes, as you're saying, like we have a piece, like a song, the song has structure, and we're playing all kinds of stuff over it, or getting someone else to. And sometimes you mentioned at the beginning, like the idea of instant composition, like the whole thing is emergent. And there may be more or less structure around what might be played in response to that. I was thinking in terms of asynchronous improvisation, or in terms of stretching what improvisation is, maybe. So when I was poet laureate, I was looking at different kinds of creativity and how those different types of creativity can intersect with words, right? And how we can use music, but other things like sculpture and movement and just a variety of kind of ways into words and ways into poetry. And out of that and out of the various things I was doing, I became really interested in the idea of fill in the blanks and Mad Libs and what that does. And I created a series of fill in the blank haiku poems. Because haiku has a very specific structure, right? It's a very, like, it's the number of syllables. There's actually even more structure than that to haiku traditionally, which is really interesting stuff. So I would write haiku that had like underline spots, not with what should go in there like Mad Libs, but just openings. And so my idea with that was an invitation to the reader to improvise in that very moment reading it. And so the reader then kind of has a choice. They don't have to participate, right? They can read it and imagine a blank, but that is still a choice, right? Versus taking the invitation and putting their own word in there. And then when they do that, it might change the meaning or not, right? But it also might change the structure or not. They might like completely explode the haiku structure, or they might stay within it, and they can do whatever comes to them first, or they can think about it a little and then be like, this is the fill in the blank. And so I was curious how I could make an invitation and like have it be both very structured and very open-ended, and kind of see what happened like in that way by trying to draw people into the process a bit.
Wow, I would love to see those. Yeah, send them to me, or I'll buy them, or however the transaction works. I want to see your fill in the blank haikus. Do them with my kid. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, they're on Instagram.
That's great, and that relates to what I've been doing a lot musically. I hadn't thought about it like that as a Mad Lib. I was just doing a workshop. I was kind of leading a jam session at a high school in Seattle that has a really strong jazz program, and a lot of kids are really playing great. But there's a lot of newcomers to the program that had been on online band for a couple years. So I was supposed to facilitate the experience and hold their hands a little bit, because there was a stage with lights and get them to come up. So one thing I do is some fill in the blank stuff, rather than like what happened to me is you stick a microphone in front of each kid and say, play a solo in front of everybody. And it's not going to sound great, and everyone's looking at you and they freeze up. But we were working on some conversational phrasing, like taking this call and response from Black American music and having this back and forth. But I was starting with some question and answer phrases. So I like gave everyone a rhythm, and we're all going bop, bop, do, dat, dat. And then I had them only change the last note. So the question phrases, you have to go up at the end. Bop, bop, ba, ba, up. Or like you're talking Canadian or something. Sorry. And then, and then going down at the end, something really simple where up, then just a real simple fill in the, but they could all do it. They did it all together, and then they took turns, and like no one was, and I'm asking them, was that complicated, or was that confusing? No. Was that scary? No. Okay. Like we're doing it. And then we started loosening the restriction. But I've done lots of that musically in the jazz world. Same with asynchronous learning. I put together my first online course that came from these workshops. It is very much call and response in the moment. Here, I play this, you play it back, or I play this and you play something different. I didn't think it would really work pre-recorded until I was having to teach a pandemic workshop, and there's so many kids, I had to mute everybody and say, I play and you play back. And then I was realizing, like, well, if I can't hear any of them and it's effective, like, this doesn't have to be live. This could be pre-recorded. So it was my idea to put together a course where, here, I play something, you copy it, and now go do it again. Rewind the video, and now I will play something, and you respond with something different. Have this conversational phrasing. So it's very asynchronous, and the advantage of that educationally is now hundreds or thousands of kids have done this, and I don't have to be there live doing it, but there's still some improvised moments happening when I was creating it and when they were responding. And it was a Mad Lib. But. Yeah,
I've done some similar things with some of my students, and sometimes because we're playing piano, we have two hands. So one hand can be the question and the other hand can be the response. But as you were saying, I often start with one hand just echoing a rhythm that the first hand does, so that like we're doing some improvising, but we're keeping it within like a very specific structure for it to be lower pressure. But sometimes what I've done is had the kids actually record their own clips and then improvise to themselves. So they're recording an ostinato, and then they can play along with their own ostinato that they've made. I mean, I don't know if that's typically how I would answer what is improvising. When I'm doing this with the kids, it's not only for improvising, it's also to get them thinking in multiple parts and to give them a little of that, like STEAM education, like learning about recording themselves and what that's like.
Yeah,
but
it answers, can it be asynchronous? Like when we're saying it's in this moment right now, well, what about if we're warping?
Elements of it, like elements of the structure. It's interesting, right? In improvisation can be it's like so open-ended. It can be so in the moment, but it can also be quite structured and asynchronous.
Can be all of these things. And
maybe
as we get to, we're talking about doing the episodes on how do we do this as maybe its own series or its own season. But so much of that is having some very narrow structure and limitations, like self-imposed limitations. It seems counterintuitive. We want to be free and create and do whatever we wish, but the practice of it so much can be limiting our tools, and we have to be more resourceful in other areas. And so I was telling the kids yesterday, I'm like, this is a temporary rule for now. I'm not saying this is Steve's rules for how you need to prescriptively improvise, but we're going to stay within these limitations, and you might, and it can be a challenge, and then navigating that challenge is actually how we practice.
I was thinking, that part, I think I said this to you when we were planning this actually, that part of the question is what isn't improvisation?
I was going to bring that up because you asked that. Yeah. I have that on my list of questions, and I'm like, I'll let you field that one first because I didn't have, I'm kind of formulating an answer because they're like, oh, it's life, but.
Yeah, whereas not improvising. I mean, because I work with kids a lot, I often think to myself things like, how would this go if I just tried it with a bunch of kids, right? We were talking about those kind of like conversational norms, or like that as we gain more experience, we start to assume certain things about what the norms are in a given group, right? So like you and I, if we are with a group of musicians, we're going to make certain assumptions about how communication is likely to go and how we're likely to go about improvising and stuff. Whereas kids don't always have a sense of those norms or a sense of as much impulse control, right? So I think as teachers, sometimes to avoid some of those surprises that come with that, such as kids being very exuberant, but that can be loud and intense on instruments. And sometimes we really stop that quickly and then tell them exactly what to do to avoid, sometimes it's like to avoid damage to our ears, damage to the instruments. Like there can be a lot of good reasons to have those structures and those boundaries. But I think sometimes it can become prescriptive, and that we don't necessarily open those doors again as widely as we might, as quickly as we might, and that sometimes we can create even more space for improvisation. I don't know if that didn't really answer what isn't improvisation. I guess that was a little more. No, but that's
as you have more and more people involved, and you've got to do some crowd control to make it the right space for everyone. There needs to be more and more structure to make it a musical experience that works as we get more people involved. And that, maybe that didn't answer the question. What isn't improvisation, Lauren?
Well, I think improvisation is not utter and complete randomness. It is generally response, like within having some kinds of goals for it. I would say it's not totally random, although some degree of randomness can be a part of the exploration, right? I would say improvisation is not 100% predictable, right? Like there needs to be some unpredictability. Yeah. I would say even if that unpredictability is like the notes might be predictable, as we've talked, that might be the one of the constraints, but other things could change around that.
And that makes me think about other areas where, improvisation in life, but things that aren't improvised when you don't want them to be predictable. Sometimes where someone's trying to make a very carefully curated experience that's, I mean, I'm even thinking of a event, you imagine a bunch of kids running around and playing at a birthday party, and then they go, okay, now everyone's going to play this game all together. They have this idea in their head of what it's supposed to be, and then try to execute that and making the experience not what it is in the moment, but with some other idea of what it is or what it was in the past. I think that can be moments, and that happens artistically as well, where we snap out of the moment and we're either planning for something else or thinking about a previous event that happened. But even music that can be very much composed or similar each time, there can be some magic of improvisation, of some dynamics that are happening in the moment. Like that show I went to last night with the Waylon Jennings, amazing, amazing folk vocal, I don't know, alt country ensemble. I don't know what you call it, but I've heard some of the stuff recorded. A lot of it's very similar, but as there was just some magic of being very attuned to the room and the moment that felt that there was those improvised moments happening, even though the music itself wasn't what we think of as improvised music.
Interesting, right? Because it kind of brings up the question of why improvise if we don't have to, right? Like in a performance, it would be in some ways less risky to not improvise at all and to have absolutely everything meticulously planned. But as you just said, that's not always what you want, right?
And that makes me even more nervous because I can't improvise my way out of whatever I got myself into if it's all predetermined. But not everyone is like that. More people are not like that. They and for a lot of people, they have less anxiety when they know they have control over the situation and what's going to happen. It helps them navigate their fight or flight response when they have that. They feel like they have that control over it. And I mean, it happens in the jazz world too, that a lot of people learn. It's very complicated when we get to jazz language or jazz vocabulary, which is a really sophisticated way of communication and tradition. But some people interpret that to mean like cutting and pasting here's lick 1 and here's lick 2. If you want to learn the vocabulary, they associate like semantics of words with this particular lick. So sometimes there's some like cutting and pasting, and that can be helpful as like an etude to put some things together. But then there are some people that, the improvising is things that are, rhythmically and melodically in this jazz language or flow, but there's not anything spontaneous happening, but it sounds like jazz. But there are some players that repeat them. It's complicated. It's not like the best players are it's all just a brand new stream of consciousness idea that has never been played before. Even some great improvisers build their own vocabulary. This is pin for another episode, but there's definitely the straight up cutting and pasting, or these jazz competitions where someone has already written an improvised solo that someone else already played, wrote it down, and someone, instead of listening to it, is like looking at it, and they're trying to play it note for note. Then they perform that written solo exactly as they have practiced it on stage and get a trophy or whatever. And so that feels, there's ways of playing other people's music to make it feel improvised, but in that case where it's a moment for someone to improvise and you're trying to play it exactly as someone else played it, as it's written down, exactly as you'd played it before, that's not it.
Yeah, and for me, like, improvisation is a tool as opposed to an outcome, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
It's not a path that leads to one particular destination. I think it's a tool that can be used in a lot of different ways. And it's like such a huge, wide spectrum of things. And as you were saying, like with repeating things, right? And that repeating things can be a part of improvisation. Improvisation doesn't mean like necessarily, like no rules, no repeats, right? Like that's not part of it. And I find that, like thinking back to the examples I was giving of piano students, I find almost every student that I've encouraged to do some kind of improvising activity, I have to remind them to repeat themselves. Like it's okay to have silence, have a moment. It's okay to slow down, play less, and repeat yourself more.
Yeah, absolutely. And when it comes down to, and people do this deliberately, in like thematic development, you can take a theme and then improvising. I mean, this is something that's part of how I practice and teach. Like, let's take this musical theme or a motif, and then we're going to develop it and change it and transform it. And that's one of a really important tool to have in the toolkit. But yeah, I mean, with you that it's not the final, it's not predictable what the final product will be, but at some point, as those of us have a career doing this, building a portfolio, here's some, okay, so it's at some point, some products show up too, right? Improvise, and then at some point, like, document it, but it's not about, and I find that, it is curious that the more I'm embracing the process, then what ends up being the quote product it can surprise me at times, but ends up being something I'm more proud of than trying to make it a certain way.
And I mean, I think improvisation can be with or without a product, but it can be a really, like, just straight up useful way of getting to the product where, like, it feels better and the result is better. I think it can be an excellent aesthetic tool, let's say, like a tool kind of on the way to getting somewhere that could have been not improvised, but it was improvised, and it's likely, better for it. I think it can also be a tool that's entirely process-based, and that it's about the learning within that process as much as it is about an aesthetic product or an aesthetic outcome. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a pretty wide range. When I think of what improvisation isn't, often I think to myself, but it's so close to what it is. We could just change it and we could be improvising a little more.
And then it's everything. Yeah, it's
Wow. And that, like, it's not about constantly being generative. We mentioned this in the last episode. It's not like against repeating an idea or learning traditional music or learning notated music. It's that there's this whole other toolbox within the idea of what improvising is. So, I was going to say it's a lot to try to sum up in like one podcast episode, right? Absolutely. It's like, as much as we were saying, the whole podcast is really about the why, in a way, the whole podcast is also about the what and about looking at those aspects too.
Absolutely. And this gets to something we touched on before about, why is this relevant? It's like, well, if we're playing, music that's composed, why is improvising relevant? But we've touched on some bigger topics. Well, and also in some of your descriptions too, talking about changing the world through improvisation. Thinking real big. So I mean, what are some of those bigger picture issues? I mean, this might touch on, I know you said maybe you had some unfinished business from our why episode too. I don't know if that was part of it, but yeah, talk about your thoughts on that. Some of the bigger implications beyond, experimenting in our own practices.
Yeah, well, I think that improvisation serves as a model for risk-taking, right? Where there's something inherently risky about it, right? Because there's an unknown to it. And as you're saying, this is something that we kind of do in our lives too, right? So I think doing it in these more controlled circumstances, controlled is maybe the wrong word, but where there are some boundaries around it, right? But it still feels frightening. It can feel bad. Like, it can feel fun and good and then lead us to making music more, and that's real cool. But it can also feel like bad and scary and not like we want to feel making music. But I think we still learn from that, right? Because through incorporating in our practice, we can work with that and starting to look at that a little more neutrally. Like, instead of, I felt terrified, I think, I felt a little shaky. Or like, I felt excited, or like, I felt some nervous energy, as opposed to, I felt terrified. I didn't think I was going to be able to do it, or, for example. So I think sometimes from practicing that, even in these really small ways, right? Practicing it with ourselves, practicing it with like our family. I mean, I think improvisation is important just because it increases how we connect to people around us. And I think using improvisation in families is important for like improving our mood and our cognition and just connecting us and helping us relate to one another. But just only on a personal level, even if we aren't making music with our families. I think it teaches those things. I think it's useful. And I think that it, like doing less of it in our culture and in our schools I do think that's changing over time. But I think the emphasis kind of being away from improvisation, the emphasis being on perfection and competitive music and some of these other aspects doesn't allow for the diversity of experience that could benefit us in many ways.
Yeah, and we're talking about the model for the public schools, very much this product of the industrial era, where it's like, okay, we need things to be efficient and predetermined outcomes, and have students sit in rows and measure the results, which can be helpful for many things. But yeah, if we're talking about other areas, especially that's more valuable now, those are anything that can be totally predetermined and turned into a system. That's easier to have a robot do it, or find someone who'll do it for less and less money. But if as we're looking at ideas like innovation or empathy or leadership, all these things that are so important that you can't just get to that through rubrics and measuring everything. So it gets to that broader talk of education.
Totally. And I mean, I think music, even without improvising, music teaches us a lot of transferable skills, like a huge amount of transferable skills. I think when we add improvising into that, and I mean, I could substitute into music, like other art forms also, teach us a lot of transferable skills. I think that like most people are on board with this, and education around that music and arts have value, not only music for the sake of music, but also because of these like transferable aspects, as you were talking about, in terms of leadership and empathy and communication and physical coordination and problem solving and helping shape our values. But in my opinion, when we add more improvisation and creativity, I think it just increases kind of the depth to which we acquire those skills, and I think we get even more out of it from adding in improvisation.
Well, as you said, practicing those skills where it's a more controlled or safe environment. I mean, a personal example that came up is just thinking, I didn't mean to do so much pandemic talk this episode, but navigating, when the pandemic shut everything down, I kind of put myself into crazy musical situations where I need to improvise with these two, I'm on stage and then I'm going to improvise in this way, and kind of a strange set of limitations I put on myself and work my way out of it. And then in life, suddenly I have these limitations that, okay, well, I still need to help support my family and pay this mortgage, and everything I'd been doing to earn money, I can't do it anymore. Like I can't teach lessons. I'm not playing gigs. I'm not doing workshops. Everything was in person. And I was treating it as an improvised exercise. And I'm like, how can I pay my bills, but I can't leave my basement? Like I'm in this chair. Here's the new structure. Here's my other ways of, I want to do this and that. I'm like, no, I need to stay within the limitation. And then it took some creative problem solving, and wasn't all wonderful, but I'm like, okay. And then it ended up with new things to offer, or serving the same people in different ways. And I just had to like flip everything out. But I really think that the improvised life, or improvised thing of making myself do uncomfortable things in weird situations is a weird, for fun. Or doing it artistically made it a lot easier to do when life throws situations like that. I'm like, here's the situations, here's the limitations. Yeah. And the limitations often aren't what we think they are. We have these that's a whole nother talk. But I remember thinking that I was able to like adjust and can we not say pivot anymore? What's the word? Whatever. But
I think part of it's staying in the zone, right? And that within that zone there may be fear, there may be uncertainty, there may be like absolute confusion, but that from experience. And so it becomes easier to stay in the zone and not think, this uncertainty or confusion means that I should run away and hide because it's certain to lead to death, right? That we kind of hold ourselves within that. And I've been using an example lately where it's like we can like rush into something, like, that feeling of rushing to get somewhere. And then like you arrive, and sometimes you arrive and you slow down, but sometimes you arrive and you still feel rushed. You're like, you don't have to rush anymore, but you're like pressed against the future almost. And you're pressed against your expectations, and you're kind of, it's this pressurized feeling.
Is that why I feel weird when I get somewhere early in the event that I do? I'm like, okay, well, I'm here. What am I supposed to do now? I'm 15 minutes early. Yeah.
Well, that's a whole other conversation. I don't claim to be an expert at being early.
we'll have a punctual expert on a future episode.
And then on the other side of that, right, we can, I mean, there's arriving late and you're rushing, but there's we can kind of hang back in an experience, right? Like we can hang back and not fully commit ourselves, and maybe that sometimes isn't even totally intentional, right? Sometimes it's like there's a fear. Sometimes we're extremely tired and we just are not like in it because we're not really feeling it, because it's just hard to kind of fully show up in that way. And then there's the sweet spot in the middle, right? And I think we're not always there automatically, but just to extend what you were saying, when we've had this experience of either kind of pressuring ourselves against the future, or kind of holding back in the past versus really being in the moment with something. I think that those micro moments of needing to do that, because it will go badly sometimes, but getting through it helps us stay with that and build our capacity for, as I was talking to you before about that, noticing what is without needing to stress out about it right away or change it right away, and just noticing and relating and responding to what's actually happening. Even if what's actually happening is challenging.
Exactly. Rather than relating to an idea of what you think it's supposed to be or what it was like last time. And I mean, that's so much of what it's about. We've hit this from so many different angles. So I mean, what is it? I mean, I hear so many times like, oh, improvisation. Well, it's kind of a jazz thing, right? And like, well, no, we're much bigger concept than that. But so much of it, I mean, that theme is, as I like to say, it's the attunement to your environment and making decisions on what's really here. And that can work musically and in all these other areas of life. And that is something I'm still in the process of doing, that, being attuned to what's here in front of me. Even though we're talking about it, I still can get distracted and wander and plan and think, ruminate on whatever as much as the next person.
Yeah. And it's like, on one hand, I can think of so many joyful and wonderful and exciting experiences improvising, like even just in a playful way as a child, but in a way that's actually like has some degree of skill to it. Like imagine, dancing around and lip syncing as a child, right? I'm doing some things that are actually like have some degree of skill to it at that point, even though I'm not thinking about it, right? And as an adult, I've of course had joyful, wonderful experiences. I've also had really like embarrassing and frightening experiences, but it's like coming back from that and allowing space for that. And I think sometimes we can access like those embarrassing and frightening experiences might even be just with myself or like one other person. I don't necessarily mean like, in front of a huge number of people. However, it can...
that happens too.
Yeah. That happens too. Yeah, that happens too.
Oh,
but we kind of learn this figure it out aspect. And I think that increases our trust in ourselves. I think that increases our trust in the process. And I think that it also increases our tolerance for, even if we know that trust in ourselves means it won't go perfectly necessarily, but we trust that we can continue with it.
Yeah, and that's a future conversation to have. It's like, why are some of these risks, it's like, why are some of these, what feels like high-risk activities and subjecting yourself to embarrassment, like, why is it worth doing it rather than staying safe and comfortable? But that's a whole nother talk. And I'm going to do this thing that's the conversational norm, where I talk about the future thing in order to wrap up the conversation. So next time, our next pilot episode, now that we've fully exhausted everything about what is improvisation. Oh gosh, we didn't even talk about what is the format of our podcast. We didn't even get there, but let me get to that. But we have to wrap up. Yeah, we're going to future conversations about what this the structure of our podcast and some of our ideas for segments and all that will look like. But also the who episode is next, about you can learn go a little bit deeper into both of our lives and experiences, and
I'll learn who you really are.
Yeah, who do you think you are? Yeah. So that's coming up next for pilot episode number 3. But yeah, thanks everyone, for those of you that made it to the end of the episode. Thanks for being here, and you can go to infiniteimprovisation.com and connect with us in our online community and download some resources if you're interested.
And let us know what you think. Maybe what is improvisation is something you would answer a little differently, and I'd like to know how you'd answer that.
Yeah, so you can reach us at hello@infiniteimprovisation.com. infiniteimprovisation.com.
Yay, looking forward to seeing you again soon.